Nathan Whitmore seized his wife's wrist at that restaurant table hard enough that she winced and hissed directly into her face. "You think one dinner with a billionaire makes you somebody you are nothing. You have always been nothing without my name." His mistress was sitting 40 feet away, watching her married lover publicly humiliate the woman who had saved his company from bankruptcy with her bare hands. Nathan's face was red. His grip tightened. He was not angry because Emily had embarrassed him. He was terrified because the woman he had spent years erasing was sitting at the best table in the room. And she was not afraid of him anymore. If this story makes you feel something tonight, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Nathan Whitmore had a gift that most dishonest men develop over time without even realizing it. He had learned how to believe his own lies, not just repeat them, not just defend them when cornered. He had reached that particular and dangerous place where the lie felt more real than the truth, where the constructed version of himself, the powerful founder, the visionary businessman, the man who deserved everything he wanted, had completely swallowed the original person underneath. At 42 years old, Nathan stood at what he privately called the peak of his life. His company, Whitmore Real Estate Group, had grown from a struggling two-person operation into one of Chicago's most talked-about luxury property firms. He had 31 employees. He had signed deals on properties that sold for north of $8 million. He had been featured in a regional business magazine with a photo that he had secretly printed and kept in his desk drawer. Not because he needed the reminder, but because on difficult mornings, it helped him feel like the man he was pretending to be. He wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He drove a car that turned heads on Lake Shore Drive. He kept a penthouse apartment that looked like something from an architectural digest, spread with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Chicago skyline, and a kitchen that had never once been used to cook a real meal. And he had Emily. Or rather, he used to have Emily in the full sense of the word, in the sense that matters. Emily Whitmore was 40 years old, and she had been Nathan's wife for 14 years. She was the kind of woman people described differently depending on how well they knew her. Strangers called her elegant. Acquaintances called her quiet. But the people who had known her before Nathan's success, reshaped the entire geography of their lives. Those people called her brilliant. They remembered the Emily who could walk into a room of wealthy collectors and within 20 minutes have every single person convinced they needed to look at a particular artist's work. They remembered the Emily who could read a market trend in the art world 3 years before it materialized. They remembered a woman with a mind like a precision instrument wrapped in warmth that made everyone around her feel instantly seen. Nathan had stopped seeing her approximately 4 years ago. Not all at once. That was never how these things worked. It happened in increments the way a room slowly fills with water, slowly enough that you convince yourself it isn't rising until suddenly you're standing with your chin at the surface. First, he stopped asking her opinion on business decisions. Then he stopped telling her about deals before they were finalized. Then he stopped coming home before 10 at night. Then he stopped apologizing for it. By the time Vanessa Cole arrived in his life, the erosion was so complete that Nathan had genuinely reframed the entire history of his marriage in his own mind. Emily was not the woman who had sacrificed her career to save his. She was not the woman who had stayed up until 2 in the morning, helping him prepare presentations when his company was hemorrhaging money and he was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. She was not the woman who had introduced him to Michael Trent, whose investment capital had literally kept Whitmore Real Estate Group alive in its most desperate hour. In Nathan's current understanding of his own story, Emily was simply his wife. Background, furniture, the person who maintained the home while he went out and conquered the world. It was a breathtaking act of self-deception, and he had performed it so completely that he no longer even noticed he was doing it. Vanessa was 29 years old, and she worked in marketing for a downtown hospitality firm. She was beautiful in the way that men like Nathan found intoxicating, luminous, and uncomplicated, impressed by the right things, skilled at making a man feel like the most interesting person in whatever room they occupied together. Nathan had met her at a charity event 8 months earlier. He had told himself afterward that nothing would happen. Then he told himself that what was happening wasn't serious. Then he stopped telling himself anything at all and simply gave himself over to it, the way a person surrenders to a current they have stopped trying to fight. He had been careful. He believed he had been careful. He had used a secondary email account for their communication. He had paid for hotel stays with a business card attached to a discretionary expense account that Emily didn't monitor. He had told Vanessa more than once that his marriage was essentially a formality, that he and Emily lived separate lives, that there was no real relationship left to protect. He had said this while wearing his wedding ring. The ring was still on his finger on the night that his entire constructed world began to collapse. It was a Thursday in late October. Chicago had turned cold in the way it did every autumn, aggressively without apology, as if the city was reminding everyone who was really in charge. Nathan had told Emily he had a client dinner. This was not entirely a lie. He did occasionally have client dinners. This simply was not one of them. He had made a reservation at Aurelius, which was the kind of restaurant where the waitstaff wore earpieces and the menu had no prices, because the clientele was not expected to concern themselves with such things. It was the kind of place where Nathan liked to take Vanessa, partly because the food was extraordinary, and partly because being seen there with a beautiful woman in a restaurant that announced your wealth simply by the fact of your presence, it fed something in him that he had never examined too closely. They arrived at 7:30. The maitre d' showed them to a corner table that Nathan had specifically requested, slightly removed from the main dining room, with a view of the room, but enough privacy that a couple could speak without feeling observed. It was a table Nathan had sat at before, with other clients, with colleagues. It was a good table, a table for people who mattered. Vanessa was wearing a deep red dress and her hair was down, and Nathan watched the room notice her as they walked to their seats. He felt that familiar surge, the one that he associated with success, with arriving, with being exactly the man he had decided he was going to be. "I love this place," Vanessa said, sliding into her chair and looking around with undisguised pleasure. "I always feel like I'm in a movie when we come here." "We can come every week if you want," Nathan said, and meant it. The first hour passed in the golden haze that Nathan had come to associate with these evenings. Good wine, good food, conversation that stayed carefully on the surface of things, which was exactly where Nathan wanted it. Vanessa made him laugh. She leaned across the table occasionally in a way that suggested intimacy and exclusivity. She asked questions about his business that flattered him without demanding too much actual detail. I was pouring their second glass of wine when he glanced across the room. It was not a searching glance. He was not looking for anything in particular. His eyes simply moved across the dining room in the casual, proprietary way of a man who feels at home in expensive spaces, and then they stopped. There was a table near the center of the room that Nathan had not noticed when they arrived. It was positioned in a section slightly elevated from the main floor, partially screened by an architectural feature, a low dividing element that created the impression of a more private space without actually separating it. It was the best table in the restaurant. Nathan had never sat there. Two people were sitting at that table. One of them was a man. Nathan recognized immediately because the man's face had appeared on the covers of business publications enough times that recognizing him required no real effort. Adrian Blackwood. Nathan knew the name, the way everyone in his world knew the name, the way you know the names of certain mountains or certain storms. Adrian Blackwood was 55 years old and had built an investment firm that managed assets worth billions. He was not simply wealthy in the way that Nathan was wealthy moderately locally, the kind of wealthy that impressed people at the right parties. Adrian Blackwood was wealthy in the way that changed the temperature of a room when he entered it. He was the kind of man who could make or destroy a company's future with a single phone call. Nathan had been trying to get a meeting with Adrian Blackwood's firm for 2 years. His outreach had gone unanswered. But the thing that turned Nathan's blood to ice water was not Adrian Blackwood. It was the woman sitting across from him. It took Nathan 4 full seconds to process what he was seeing because his brain was not prepared to accept it. His brain was wired to expect Emily at home, quiet peripheral waiting defined entirely by the shape of his absence. His brain did not have a category for Emily here in Aurelius, at the best table in the restaurant, sitting across from one of the most powerful men in America. But there she was. And she looked nothing like the woman Nathan had reduced her to in his own imagination. She was wearing a deep green dress he had never seen before. Her hair was arranged in a way that was effortlessly sophisticated, the kind of style that looked simple, but wasn't. She was leaning slightly forward speaking, and Adrian Blackwood was listening with the focused attention of a man who does not have to pay close attention to very many people, but had decided this woman warranted it. She was not looking at the room. She was not checking to see who was watching. She was entirely present in her own conversation, in her own moment, in a version of herself that Nathan suddenly realized he had not seen, or perhaps had not allowed himself to see in a very long time. She looked powerful, not in a way she was performing, in a way she simply was. Nathan set down his wine glass. He did not remember making the decision to set it down. "Nathan?" Vanessa's voice reached him from a distance. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He had, in a way. He had seen the ghost of the woman his wife used to be, and he was realizing with a cold and sickening clarity that she hadn't disappeared at all. She had simply been somewhere he wasn't looking. "I'm fine," he said. The words came out wrong, too flat, too controlled. He picked up his wine glass again and brought it to his lips and did not drink from it. He watched Emily. He watched the way she gestured when she spoke a quality he had once loved about her, the expressiveness of her hands, the way her whole body participated in her thinking. He watched the way Adrian Blackwood responded, nodding, sometimes smiling once, leaning back in his chair in the way that people do when someone has said something genuinely surprising and impressive. Nathan had spent 2 years trying to get a meeting with that man, and his wife was having dinner with him. Something shifted in Nathan's chest. He wanted to identify it as anger, because anger was easier. Anger had a clear direction, a clear target. Anger was something he knew how to weaponize. But underneath the anger running parallel to it, colder and deeper, was something else. Fear. He was afraid of what this meant. He was afraid of what he didn't know. And beneath even the fear was something he had no name for. Yet a first cold whisper of the understanding that he had miscalculated something important. That somewhere in the process of believing his own story about who was powerful in his life and who wasn't, he had missed something. He had missed a great deal. "Nathan." Vanessa's voice was sharper now, a small edge in it that he recognized as the beginning of irritation. "You're staring at something. What is it?" "Nothing." He pulled his eyes back to her. He smiled. The smile felt like putting on a mask that no longer quite fit his face. "I thought I recognized someone." "Did you?" "I was wrong." He was not wrong, but he needed a few more minutes before he did anything about what he was seeing. He needed to understand it first, or at least understand it well enough to approach it from a position of control. But understanding was not cooperating with him. He turned back to his plate and moved food around it, and said something to Vanessa that he could not later recall, and listened to her response without hearing it. And all the while his attention was stretched like a wire across the room, taut and vibrating, anchored to the table where his wife sat with a billionaire investor, and looked like a woman who had never needed saving at all. 40 minutes. He watched for 40 minutes. He watched the courses arrive and be cleared. He watched Emily and Adrian Blackwood share what appeared to be a genuinely good meal with the ease and comfort of two people who were not performing for each other, who had moved past the formal stage of whatever relationship this was into something more genuine and collaborative. He watched Emily laugh, once clearly at something Adrian had said, a real laugh, not a polite one, the kind that a person cannot manufacture. Nathan had not heard Emily laugh like that in years. He had not thought about the fact that he hadn't heard it. He simply noted now, watching from across the room, that she used to laugh that way, and that somewhere along the line, the laughing had stopped, and he had never once wondered why. He was still watching when he made the decision. I was going to go over there. He had constructed in the last 40 minutes several different versions of this situation that he found acceptable. Perhaps Emily was there on some volunteer capacity. She had always been involved in charitable organizations, and people like Adrian Blackwood attended charity events. Perhaps it was a coincidence of mutual friends. Perhaps there was a perfectly ordinary explanation that he simply couldn't see from across the room. What he would not accept, what he refused to fully construct, even in the privacy of his own thoughts, was the possibility that Emily had arranged this meeting herself, had pursued. It had built a relationship with this man that Nathan knew nothing about. Because that possibility would mean that while Nathan had been conducting his secret life, Emily had been conducting something of her own, and Nathan was not prepared to be the person who hadn't noticed. He stood up from the table. "I'll be right back," he said to Vanessa. "Where are you going?" "I need to speak to someone." "Nathan." But he was already moving. He crossed the dining room with the deliberate stride of a man who was working very hard to look calm. He was aware of the restaurant around him, the other tables, the soft music, the weight of expensive ambiance pressing in from all sides. but it all felt distant now, like a dream's set dressing. His focus had narrowed to a single point. He arrived at Emily's table. He stood at the edge of it. Emily looked up, and there it was, the thing that Nathan had been bracing for without knowing he was bracing for it. She was not surprised to see him. She was not startled. She was not flustered. She did not look caught or guilty or nervous or any of the emotions that Nathan had unconsciously been expecting that would have restored the balance of power he relied on. She simply looked at him, calmly, steadily, like a woman who had been expecting this moment for quite some time and had decided exactly who she was going to be when it arrived. "Hello, Nathan," she said. 2 words, quiet as anything, and they hit him harder than a shout would have. Adrian Blackwood looked up from the table with the measured, unhurried attention of a man who was accustomed to watching situations develop and could wait indefinitely for them to reveal their actual nature. Nathan felt the power dynamics of the moment with an almost physical sensation. He was standing. They were sitting. He had approached. They had not moved. In every technical sense, he should have been the one in control of this encounter. He had initiated it. He was the one who had walked across the room. But control was not what he felt. "What are you doing here?" Nathan said. I had not planned to lead with that. He had planned to the extent that he had planned anything to open with something that sounded less like accusation, less like a husband demanding an accounting from a wife he had no moral standing to question. But the words came out the way they came out, sharpened by 40 minutes of mounting anxiety, and they landed in the air between them like a dropped object. Emily held his gaze. She did not look at Adrian. She did not look at the room. She looked at Nathan with the particular steadiness of someone who has made peace with exactly how much they have to lose. "I'm having dinner," she said, "with a colleague." "A colleague," Nathan repeated the word. He heard something wrong in his own voice, a frequency that was too tight, too close to cracking. "You didn't mention you were going out tonight." "You told me you had the client dinner," Emily said. "I didn't realize we were sharing itineraries again." The quiet precision of that answer, the word again carrying everything it carried. Nathan glanced at Adrian Blackwood. Adrian had still not spoken. He was watching Nathan with an expression that was not unfriendly, not hostile, simply observant, the expression of a man who had sat across tables from a great many people under pressure and could read the situation without being told anything about it. "Mr. Blackwood," Nathan said, forcing his voice into a register he hoped sounded professional. "I'm Nathan Whitmore. My firm has actually been hoping to connect with your office. We sent several proposals over the past—" "I know who you are," Adrian said. The response was not rude, it was simply precise, and it shut down the attempted pivot so cleanly that Nathan had no recovery route. "Nathan," Emily's voice. She had not raised it. She never needed to raise it. "This isn't the moment." "I disagree," Nathan said, and the thin veneer of professional composure was giving way, now crumbling at the edges in a way he could feel but couldn't stop. "I think we need to talk. Now." "We can talk at home," Emily said. "If you still plan to come home tonight." The conditional in that sentence. If you still plan to come home tonight, she knew. In the fraction of a second, it took him to process those 8 words. Nathan understood with complete certainty that Emily knew, not suspected, knew, and had known for some time, and had chosen to say nothing, to do nothing, to sit quietly in the shape of the life he had left her with, while building something else entirely in the space where his neglect had created room. "Emily," he started. "Nathan." She said his name one more time, and this time there was something in it, not anger, not even sadness exactly, but a finality that felt like a door closing, not being slammed, not being locked, simply closing. "Go back to your table." He stood there for 3 more seconds that felt like 3 years, and then he did something that he had not expected to do. He turned around. He walked back across the restaurant. He sat down across from Vanessa, who looked at him with eyes that were carefully neutral in the way of a woman deciding how much she needs to know about what she just watched happen. "Was that your wife?" Vanessa asked. Nathan looked at her. He thought about lying. The lie came to him automatically, already formed, already reasonable sounding. But for the first time in a very long time, the energy required to deliver it simply wasn't there. "Yes," he said. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "She looks different than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know." Vanessa picked up her wine. "Someone more—" She paused, searching. I'm not sure. She looks like she's exactly where she wants to be. Nathan said nothing, because Vanessa was right. Emily looked exactly like a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be, and Nathan could not say the same thing about himself. Not tonight. Not anymore. He reached for his wine and found the glass empty and did not call the waiter to refill it. He sat in the expensive restaurant with the beautiful woman he had risked his entire life to be with, and he thought about the look on his wife's face when she had said his name, not the first time with the initial quiet greeting, but the second time with the finality that had felt like a verdict, and he tried to identify when exactly he had lost the thing. He was only now beginning to understand he had. Not Vanessa. Not the marriage certificate. Not the penthouse or the car or the suits. He had lost Emily's belief in him. And he had lost it so gradually, so quietly, so entirely through his own choices that he had not noticed it happening until the moment he walked across a restaurant and looked into his wife's eyes and found that what used to live there, the warmth, the investment, the hope had been replaced by something clear and cool and entirely his own fault. Behind him at the center table, Emily was saying something to Adrian Blackwood that made him nod slowly, thoughtfully. Nathan did not turn around to see it, but he knew it was happening. And knowing it was happening and being powerless to do anything about it was a feeling he had never experienced in quite this way before. He was a man who had spent years engineering control over his company, over his image, over his wife's expectations, over the story the world told about him. And tonight, in the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, sitting across from the woman he thought would give him everything he wanted, he finally felt what it was to have no control at all. Not over what Emily was doing, not over what Adrian Blackwood was thinking, and not most terrifyingly over the question that had lodged itself in his mind, like a splinter that he couldn't see but couldn't stop feeling. What had Emily been building in all the time he had spent looking away? I didn't know, but he was about to find out. And some part of him, the part that had once known the real Emily, before he had made himself forget her, suspected that whatever the answer was, it was going to change everything. He had walked into this restaurant believing he had won at life. He was leaving it with the first real understanding that he might have already lost something he could never get back. Not because of the woman across the table from him, because of the one across the room, the one he had stopped seeing, the one it turned out that the world had not stopped seeing at all. The drive home that night was the longest 40 minutes of Nathan Whitmore's life. He sat in the back of his car. He had called a driver because he had drunk enough wine that even he could not justify the wheel. And he stared out the window at Chicago sliding past him in streaks of cold light, and he turned the image over and over in his mind, the way a man turns a stone in his hand, looking for the edge that explains its shape. Emily, at Aurelius, with Adrian Blackwood. Not accidentally, not coincidentally. With intention, with preparation, with a dress he had never seen and a composure he had not expected, and a smile that had done something to him he still could not fully name. He pulled out his phone. He opened his messages. He typed Emily's name and then stared at the blank text field for 60 seconds and then closed the app without writing anything. What was he going to say? Come home and explain yourself. He had left a mistress at the table to go interrogate his wife in public, and his wife had looked at him like he was a minor inconvenience she had already planned for. There was no message that recovered from that. There was no text that restored the balance. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and pressed his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Nathan Whitmore did not feel powerful. He felt like a man who had been playing a game without understanding the rules, who had just looked up to find the other player was 3 moves ahead and smiling about it. Emily was not home when he arrived. I knew she wouldn't be. He stood in the penthouse that she had furnished and organized and filled with the small details that made a space feel like a home rather than a display. The particular lamp in the reading corner that she'd found at an estate sale. The books arranged not alphabetically but by color on the lower shelves, because she'd read once that it was easier on the eyes, the throw blanket folded on the arm of the couch, in exactly the way that meant someone had sat there recently and then gotten up with somewhere to go, and he stood in the middle of it and felt the weight of everything he had refused to see. I went to bed without waiting up for her. He told himself this was a choice, that he was not going to perform concern he didn't feel, that he was going to maintain control of the narrative, but he lay in the dark for 2 hours before he heard the door. He heard her moving through the apartment with the quiet deliberateness of a woman who knew the space completely and did not need lights to navigate it. He heard the soft sounds of her routine, the bathroom, the closet, the gentle mechanical click of a door pulled fully closed. She did not come to their bedroom. She went to the guest room, and the soft finality of that door closing was louder than anything she could have said. Nathan stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep for a very long time. The morning came gray and cold. Nathan was dressed and at the kitchen table with coffee by 7, which was earlier than he typically surfaced on a Friday. He was there because he needed to be the one who was already present when Emily appeared. He needed that small tactical advantage of having arrived first. Emily walked into the kitchen at 7:15. She was dressed, not for staying home, for going somewhere. She was wearing a blazer over a silk blouse, her hair pulled back with the kind of clean precision that takes practice, and she was carrying a leather portfolio that Nathan recognized as something she'd owned before they married, something from her previous life that she must have kept somewhere he hadn't noticed. She saw him at the table. She didn't stop moving. She went to the coffee maker and poured a cup with the ease of someone who had decided before entering the room exactly how this interaction was going to go. "You're up early," she said. "We need to talk," Nathan said. "I know." She turned and leaned against the counter and held her coffee in both hands and looked at him with that same quality from the night before, that alertness, that readiness, like someone who has been waiting for a conversation that was always going to happen and has spent the waiting time preparing for it. "Go ahead." Nathan had rehearsed this. He had lain in the dark and assembled his approach. He was going to be measured, reasonable. He was going to ask questions rather than make accusations. He was going to present himself as a husband concerned about his wife's behavior, not as a man scrambling to reclaim footing he'd already lost. That was what he had planned. What came out was, "How long have you known Adrian Blackwood?" Emily took a sip of coffee. "A while," she said. "How long is a while, Emily?" "Several years. We met at the Carson Gallery opening in 2019. You were there too, actually. You spent the evening talking to Martin Hale about a property deal. I spent it talking to Adrian about art investment trends in emerging markets." She paused. "You probably don't remember." He didn't. And the fact that she knew he didn't remember stated it plainly without accusation, but with complete accuracy that landed with precision. "Why didn't you ever mention him?" Nathan asked. "I mentioned him twice," Emily said. "Once in 2020 when I told you I'd reconnected with him at a conference and you said that was nice and changed the subject to your Riverdale development. Once in 2021 when I told you he'd reached out about a consulting opportunity and you said you didn't think it was a good use of my time." She tilted her head slightly. "You told me to focus on what mattered." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. "So I did," Emily said. "I focused on what mattered, just not in the way you meant." The silence stretched between them. Nathan picked up his coffee mug and set it back down without drinking. "What is he to you?" Nathan asked. "A colleague," Emily said, "and an investor." "An investor in what?" This was the moment. Nathan saw it, the slight shift in Emily's posture, the deliberate quality of the breath she took before she answered, the way she set her coffee mug down on the counter, with the care of someone placing something valuable in a safe position. "In my company," she said. Nathan went very still. "Your company," he repeated. "Yes. You started a company." "I've been developing it for 8 months," Emily said. "It will formally launch in 6 weeks. Adrian is the lead investor. We've also brought in 2 partners from the art world, people I worked with before we were married. The business model is built around luxury art advisory services for high net worth investors and collectors. We already have 4 clients signed. One of them has a portfolio valued at over $40 million. Nathan stared at her. 8 months. She had been building this for 8 months. While he was conducting his affair with Vanessa, scheduling dinners at luxury restaurants, telling himself that his wife was comfortable and uncomplicated in the background of his real life, Emily had been quietly constructing an entire future. She had done it without his money, without his connections, without asking for his opinion or his permission, or even apparently his awareness. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. His voice sounded strange to him, smaller than he intended. Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Because the last time I told you about a professional opportunity, you told me it wasn't a good use of my time. And the time before that, you changed the subject." And the time before that you said I was already comfortable and you didn't understand why I needed more. She picked up her portfolio. I decided to stop asking for permission to want something. She walked toward the kitchen door. Emily. Nathan stood up. We're not done. She stopped, turned. And what was in her face in that moment was not anger. Nathan almost wished it had been anger. Anger he knew how to deflect. Anger gave him something to push against. What was in Emily's face was something quieter and more absolute, something that had been building behind a patient dam for years and had finally quietly simply run past it. Nathan, she said, last night, that woman you were with, don't tell me she was a client. The kitchen went very quiet. Nathan said nothing. I've known for 5 months, Emily said. Her name is Vanessa Cole. She works in marketing. You met her at the Meridian Charity Gala in February. You've used the Kessler Hotel on Michigan Avenue 11 times. You created a secondary email account through your business server. Marcus in your IT department is not as discreet as he thinks he is. She paused. Should I continue? Nathan sat back down. Not a choice. His legs made the decision for him. Emily, I don't need an explanation, she said. I don't need an apology right now. What I need you to understand is that I didn't do any of this. She gestured slightly with the portfolio, as revenge. I did it because I looked at my life 8 months ago, and I realized that I had made myself very small for a very long time, and that I had done it for a man who had stopped seeing me, and I decided I was done being small. She moved to leave again. Don't go, Nathan said. And then because some part of him recognized that commanding her had permanently expired as an option. Please. She stopped. What do you want me to say? He asked. Tell me what you want me to say. Emily turned back one more time and looked at him with something that might have been in another life compassion. Nothing right now, Nathan. That's the thing. There's nothing to say right now that changes anything. The things that needed to be said were years ago, and I kept waiting for you to say them, and you never did. She shook her head very slightly. I have a meeting at 9. We'll talk tonight if you want. She left. Nathan sat at the kitchen table in the penthouse that used to feel like a statement of his success, and he listened to the elevator descend, and he thought about the word she had used. Small. She had made herself small. He had never thought of it that way. He had thought of it as Emily being content, being settled, being someone who had found her role and was comfortable in it. He had reframed her diminishment as her preference, but she had said the word small, and once she said it, he could not unfeel it, could not unsee the years of it. Emily abandoning her career contacts because Nathan said it wasn't worth the energy. Emily stopping mentioning her ideas because Nathan stopped responding to them. Emily moving through their home and their life with increasing quietness, like a person learning to take up less and less space so they can remain in a room they are no longer sure they are welcome in. He had done that. He had not done it with intention. He had not sat down and decided to reduce his wife, but the effect was identical to if he had. Nathan got up from the table and walked to the window and looked at Chicago and thought about the conversation he had just had, and the more he thought about it, the more something cold settled into the space behind his sternum. She had not told him she was leaving. She had not told him she was staying. She had simply told him the truth and walked out the door and let him sit with it, which was almost worse, because it meant the decision was still unmade, which meant there was still something at stake, which meant that whatever he did next actually mattered. That afternoon, Nathan was at his office by 10 and useless for the entirety of the day. He sat through 2 meetings and contributed nothing of substance to either. He called Vanessa twice and let it ring through to voicemail both times, and then felt a complicated shame about it, that he couldn't organize into anything coherent. He pulled up the website for a firm called Whitmore and Blackwood Advisory, because of course he had searched it the moment he got to his desk, and he sat and read it with the focused attention of a man encountering something he has no roadmap for. The site was clean, elegant, the kind of design that communicated credibility without shouting about it. There was a brief company description, luxury art advisory services for collectors and high-net-worth investors, and a list of areas of expertise that read like someone had taken Emily's brain and simply organized it into paragraphs. Art market analysis, portfolio curation, cross-sector investment strategy in alternative assets. There was a page about the founding partners. Emily's photograph was professional and recent, and she was looking directly into the camera with an expression that Nathan recognized from somewhere deep in his memory, from 14 years ago, from the woman he had married, from the version of her that existed before he had spent years convincing her that her ambitions were an inconvenience. She looked like herself. She looked like the Emily he had fallen in love with, and then over a decade of small daily choices had slowly converted into something quieter and easier to manage. He closed the laptop. He leaned back in his chair and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and for the first time in years, Nathan Whitmore had no narrative to retreat into, no story about himself that made his behavior reasonable, no version of events in which he was simply a busy and successful man who had grown apart from a wife who hadn't grown with him. He had looked at her company website and seen her clearly, and he could not unset that clarity now. His phone buzzed. His assistant Margaret, with a reminder about a 4 o'clock call with a property developer in New York. He ignored it. His phone buzzed again. This time the name on the screen was not Margaret. It was David Chen, his lawyer. Nathan answered before he thought about why a Friday afternoon call from his personal attorney might be worth thinking about before answering. "Nathan," David said. His voice had the particular careful quality of a man delivering information he has been given specific instructions to deliver in a specific way. "I wanted to give you a heads up before anything arrives formally." Nathan went cold. "David, what is it?" "Emily called my office this morning," David said. "She was asking about the process. She wanted to understand the timeline and the steps involved." A pause. She was very calm, very organized. She had already spoken to Carol Metcalf. Carol Metcalf was the most respected family law attorney in Chicago. She was also, Nathan happened to know, extraordinarily expensive and extraordinarily effective, and the people who retained her were people who had decided something completely and were simply executing the decision. Nathan's hand tightened on the phone. "She hasn't filed anything yet," David continued. "But Nathan, she was asking very specific questions. About asset documentation, about the business partnership structure, about what was established before the marriage versus what developed during it." Another pause. "She knows exactly what she's looking for." "Thank you, David," Nathan said. He heard his own voice from a distance, very controlled, very flat. "I'll be in touch." He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand. She had called Carol Metcalf this morning, after their conversation, after she had picked up her leather portfolio, the one from her previous life, the one she had kept somewhere. He hadn't noticed, and walked out of the kitchen with the quiet certainty of a woman who had already made a decision and was simply executing it in the correct sequence. She had been calm, David said. Of course she had been calm, because Emily had not woken up this morning and reacted. Emily had been planning. Emily had been building. And while Nathan had spent the last 24 hours ricocheting between anxiety and justification and the particular helplessness of a man watching a situation develop that he does not know how to control, Emily had been moving through her morning with the precision of someone who had done their grieving already, who had arrived at the other side of a long and painful internal process and was now simply taking the steps. She had built a company. She had retained a lawyer. She had known about Vanessa for 5 months without saying a single word. How long, the question moved through him like cold water. How long had Emily been in this place of clear-eyed quiet, devastating forward motion, while he had been telling himself the story of his own importance? I thought about the 14 years. He thought about the early years, the struggling years when Emily had been the one with contacts and credibility, while Nathan had been the one with ambition and not much else. He remembered an investor meeting in 2012 where he had been about to lose the room entirely. He could feel it happening, that particular shift in attention, that meant the money was mentally leaving, and Emily had said something from her seat along the wall, a quiet but perfectly calibrated observation about emerging luxury market demographics, and she had brought the room back. Not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention to what she had done, but she had done it, and Nathan had known she'd done it, and afterward he had held her face in his hands and told her she was extraordinary. He had meant it then. He had simply stopped meaning it somewhere along the way, and then he had stopped remembering that he'd ever meant it, and eventually he had stopped remembering the meeting at all, until now. Until he was sitting in his office at 4 in the afternoon, a 4 o'clock call with New York going unanswered, a lawyer's warning echoing in his ears, and the image of his wife's face on a company website she had built without him sitting behind his eyelids every time he closed his eyes. His phone rang again. This time it was Vanessa. He looked at her name on the screen for a long moment. He let it ring. When it stopped, he sat in the silence of his office and let himself feel the full weight of the thing he had built and the thing he had destroyed, and he understood for the first time with total clarity that those were not two separate things. They were the same thing. The building and the destroying had been happening simultaneously, and he had been paying attention only to one side of the ledger. He had built a company. He had destroyed a marriage. He had built a reputation. He had destroyed a woman's belief in him slowly over years, so incrementally that neither of them had marked the moment it was finally gone. I didn't go home at his usual time that evening. He walked. He did something he could not remember doing in years. He simply walked through Chicago without a destination, without his phone pressed to his ear, without a meeting to calculate or an impression to manage. He walked in the cold October air, along streets he used to know well when he was young and new to the city, and everything still felt possible in the uncomplicated way that things feel possible before you understand their cost. I thought about what Emily had said. She had made herself small for a very long time for a man who had stopped seeing her. He thought about what she had done instead. She had stopped asking for permission to want something. He turned that sentence over. Stopped asking for permission to want something. He had not understood until he walked these streets in the cold, with David Chen's phone call sitting in his chest like a stone, what it meant that his wife had needed permission. Not his explicit permission. He had never told Emily she needed to ask. But through years of dismissal and redirection, and the subtle systematic message that her ambitions were secondary to his narrative, he had built a structure in which his silence on the subject was the answer. And Emily, being the precise and intelligent woman she had always been, had read the structure correctly and had quietly begun to dismantle it. I was 42 years old, and he was walking through Chicago in the dark, and he was thinking about whether the person he had become was the person he had meant to become, and the answer was uncomfortable in a way that had no quick resolution. He got back to the penthouse at 9:30. Emily was there. She was sitting in the reading corner in the lamplight with a book open on her lap. She looked up when he came in, and the look she gave him was not warm, and it was not cold. It was simply honest. The look of a woman who had decided to stop performing emotions she did not feel and was offering him only what was real. "You walked," she said. She could tell somehow, maybe the cold in him, the way his cheeks were still colored from the wind. "I needed to think," he said. She nodded. She did not say anything. He sat down on the couch across from her, not close, not distant, at the honest distance between two people who are being real with each other for perhaps the first time in years. "I know you called Carol Metcalf," he said. Emily held his gaze. "Yes." "Are you leaving me?" "I have been leaving you for a long time, Nathan," Emily said. "I just didn't have anywhere to go yet." She closed her book carefully and set it aside. "Now I do." Nathan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together, and he looked at the floor between them and said the thing that had been forming in him all afternoon during the walk and the silence and the cold. "I forgot who you were." Emily did not respond immediately. "Not on purpose," he continued. "I know that doesn't change it, but I need to say it. I forgot who you were, and I think part of me did it on purpose, even though I didn't admit it, because if I remembered who you were, I would have had to reckon with what I was doing to you, and I wasn't ready to do that." The room was quiet. "I know," Emily said finally. Her voice was very even, very still. "I know you didn't wake up every morning and decide to erase me. I understand that it was a long process, and that you probably convinced yourself along the way that I was fine, that I was comfortable, that comfort was the same thing as happiness." She looked at him directly. "But Nathan, I need you to hear what I'm about to say." "I'm listening," he said. "I am not leaving because of Vanessa," Emily said. "I want to be clear about that. The affair hurt. Of course it hurt. But it was the symptom, not the disease. The disease was 14 years of becoming invisible in my own life. The disease was having my ideas dismissed and my ambitions patronized and my intelligence treated as background noise." Her voice did not shake, not once. "The disease was being married to a man who saw me as furniture in his story. And I cannot recover from the disease by treating the symptom. I can only leave the conditions that made me sick." Nathan said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate. She was right. She was so precisely right that the accuracy of it felt like a physical thing pressing on his chest. "I don't want you to go," he said. And he meant it. He meant it in the way of a man who has only understood the value of something at the moment it is genuinely at risk of being gone, which was, he recognized exactly the pattern that had brought them here in the first place. But he meant it. "I know," Emily said. "But what you want, Nathan, what you want has been the center of this marriage for a very long time, and it can't be the center anymore." She stood up, and she was composed and clear and absolute. "We'll need to have more conversations. There's a lot to work through, but tonight I need you to just sit with what I've told you, and I need you to not call Vanessa, and I need you to think about who you actually are under all of this." She paused at the door of the hallway. "Because I think somewhere under all the money and the image and the story you've been telling yourself, there might still be a person worth knowing. But I can't stay to find out, Nathan. I've already spent too long waiting to find out." She walked down the hallway. The guest room door closed. Nathan sat in the lamplight of the reading corner, in the light of the lamp she had found at an estate sale, the lamp that made the corner warm and livable in a way that the rest of the penthouse, for all its expensive design, had never quite managed, and he sat with everything she had said. He did not call Vanessa. He did not open his laptop. He did not reach for his phone. He sat. And in the silence of the home that Emily had made from the shell he had provided, Nathan Whitmore began the slow and painful work of understanding exactly what he had done and exactly what it had cost, and whether there was any version of himself capable of paying what was actually owed. The answer did not come that night, but the question finally was real. He did not sleep again that night. Nathan lay on the couch in the living room. He could not bring himself to sleep in the bedroom, which felt too large and too quiet, and too much like a room that had already been vacated by the person who mattered, and he stared at the ceiling and let the hours move past him without trying to stop them. By 3 in the morning, he had stopped trying to construct arguments and counter-arguments. By 4, he had stopped trying to figure out what to say to Emily. By 5, when the first gray light began pressing at the windows, he had arrived at something unfamiliar, a stillness that was not peace, but was at least honest, a place where he was not performing anything, not even for himself. He thought about the lamp, the estate sale lamp in the reading corner, the one that made the corner warm in a way the rest of the penthouse never quite managed. He thought about the fact that Emily had found it, carried it home, positioned it exactly right, and that he had never once asked her where it came from, or whether she liked it, or what it felt like to arrange beauty in a space that increasingly felt like someone else's home. He had lived in the warmth of her attention for 14 years without ever turning around to look at the source. The weekend passed like weather present and uncomfortable and beyond his control. Emily moved through the apartment with the careful, deliberate distance of a woman who has decided on her direction and is simply waiting for the logistics to align. She was not cruel. She was not cold in the theatrical way of someone performing indifference. She was simply separate, and the separateness was worse than any fight they might have had, because a fight would have meant there was still something between them that needed resolution, and this was something else. This was the quiet of a decision already made. On Saturday morning, Nathan tried twice to begin a real conversation. The first time Emily was on a call in the spare bedroom, and he stood outside the door for 40 seconds listening to her voice, professional, confident, unhurried, before he turned and walked away. The second time, she was at the kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad covered in handwriting that he recognized as her working shorthand, the precise, fast script she used when her mind was moving faster than anyone could follow, and she looked up when he came in, and the look was not unkind, but it was complete, like a sentence that has already ended. "I'm going to make calls this afternoon," she said. "The Blackwood Advisory formal setup meeting is Monday morning. Emily, Nathan." She said his name the way a person says the name of a fact. "Please." He made coffee. He sat at the other end of the table. He did not say what he had come to say. By Sunday evening, Nathan had made a decision of his own. He called Vanessa. This time she answered on the second ring, and her voice had the careful brightness of a woman who has been waiting and is trying not to show how much. "Nathan, I wasn't sure I was going to hear from you." "I know," he said. "I need to talk to you." "Okay." A pause. The brightness adjusted slightly. "Should I be worried?" I thought about how to answer that, and decided that honesty, which he had so thoroughly abandoned in recent months, was the only thing that had any integrity left. "I think we need to stop seeing each other," he said. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. "Because of what happened at the restaurant," Vanessa said finally. "Because of what happened long before the restaurant," Nathan said. "The restaurant just made me see it clearly." Another silence. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had changed. The careful brightness was gone, and what was underneath it was something more real, something that reminded Nathan she was a person too, not just a role in his story. "Were you ever going to leave her?" Vanessa asked. "Actually leave her? Or was I always just the part of your life you kept separate?" Nathan closed his eyes. "I told myself I was going to," he said. "I think I was lying to myself." "Yeah," Vanessa said, very quietly. "I think you were too." She ended the call without saying goodbye, and Nathan sat with the phone in his hand and felt the particular shame of a man who has used another person's hope as a convenience and only recognized it clearly at the moment it cost him something. He had hurt Vanessa too. He had not thought about that. He had been so occupied with the drama of his marriage, with the shock of Emily's transformation, with the mechanics of his own crisis, that he had not once stopped to consider that Vanessa had believed things he had told her that were not true, and had organized her feelings around a future he had never genuinely intended. He added that to the ledger. The ledger was getting very long. Monday morning arrived, and with it the part of Nathan's professional life that he had been managing to keep at arm's length from his personal collapse began to make itself impossible to ignore. He was at the office by 8:30. His executive assistant Grace had the morning schedule on her tablet and was going through it with the efficient forward momentum of a woman who did not yet know that her employer had spent the weekend experiencing the full demolition of his private life. "The Morrison Group pushed their 10 o'clock to 11, Grace said. "Harrison Realty wants a call before end of week about the Lakeview listings. And you have a message from James Park at Meridian Capital. He said it's not urgent, but he'd appreciate a call when you have time." Nathan stopped walking. "James Park called." Grace checked the message. "Yesterday afternoon, left his direct line." Nathan went into his office and closed the door and stood at his desk for a moment before he understood why that name had triggered something. James Park was a managing director at Meridian Capital. Meridian Capital had been one of Whitmore Real Estate Group's two largest institutional partners for the past 3 years. Their partnership represented roughly 40% of Nathan's firm's annual revenue structure. James Park did not typically call on Sunday afternoons about things that were not urgent. Nathan called him back. James answered immediately, which was its own kind of signal. "Nathan, thanks for getting back to me." "James, what's going on?" A brief pause, the pause of a man choosing his words with care. "I want to be straightforward with you because I think you deserve that. We've had some internal conversations over the past few weeks about the direction of our real estate portfolio. It's nothing personal, and it's not a reflection of your individual work, but we're reconsidering some of our partnership structures going forward." Another pause. "I wanted to give you advance notice before anything formal comes through because I respect what you've built." Nathan sat down. "How formal," he said. "We're not terminating anything today," James said, "but I'd be dishonest if I told you our next partnership cycle review was going to look the same as the last one. Some concerns have come up at the board level. I'd rather not go into detail on a phone call. Maybe we can sit down this week." "What kind of concerns?" Nathan kept his voice level through an effort that cost him something. James was quiet for a moment. "There's been some talk, Nathan, about judgment. About the kind of decisions a person makes in their personal life and what that says about how they operate professionally. I know that sounds like it shouldn't be a business consideration, but our board is conservative, and they pay attention to things like this, and some things have come to their attention in the last month." The restaurant, Nathan thought. Aurelius, he and Vanessa. In one of the most visible, most elite dining establishments in Chicago on a Thursday night when half the city's business class was present and paying attention. Of course it had come to their attention. He had walked through that room believing himself invisible, believing that the penumbra of his own self-confidence made him untouchable. He had not calculated what it looked like to the 40 other people in that restaurant who recognized him, who knew him, who watched him stand at his wife's table and conduct himself with the entitlement of a man who believed the rules were for other people. "I appreciate the advance notice, James," Nathan said. His voice was very controlled, very professional. It was his best skill that controlled the ability to sound measured when everything underneath was not. "Let's set up a meeting." He hung up and sat at his desk, and stared at nothing. The Meridian Partnership, 40% of his revenue structure. He pulled up his calendar and looked at the next 30 days and thought about the conversations he would have to have, the assurances he would have to offer the work of managing a perception that he had been careless with for months. This was what he had not accounted for. He had been so consumed with the private machinery of his deception, the secondary email, the hotel bookings, the careful maintenance of two separate narratives, that he had lost sight of the fact that his public and private lives were not actually separate. They inhabited the same city, they moved through the same rooms, and the people who mattered to his business were watching the same Nathan Whitmore who was sitting in luxury restaurants with women who were not his wife, conducting himself with the breezy confidence of a man with nothing to hide. He had thought the confidence was protection. It had been advertisement. By 10 o'clock he had 3 other messages waiting that he had not noticed because of the Meridian call. One was from a commercial real estate contact named Brent Holloway, who was vague but warm in a way that said he had heard something and was checking the temperature before he decided what to do with it. One was from his accountant asking Nathan to review some documentation that he had been putting off for 3 weeks. And one was from his firm's office manager, Claudia, letting him know that 2 of his senior agents had requested a meeting with him this week to discuss what she called operational concerns. Operational concerns. 2 of his best agents wanted a meeting. Nathan looked at the 3 messages and understood with a cold and comprehensive clarity that the damage from the weekend was not confined to his marriage. It was spreading. It was moving through the professional structure of his life, the way water moves through a wall, invisible at first, then suddenly everywhere. He called Claudia back. "Set up the meeting," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon." "Of course," Claudia said, and there was something careful in her voice, the tone of a competent employee protecting her professionalism in a situation that was beginning to feel like it had more beneath the surface than she was paid to address. He had built this company. He had built it from nothing, from a desk in a rented room, from ideas and persistence and early mornings and late nights, and the particular grinding faith of a person who has decided to bet everything on their own ability. And Emily had stood next to him for every year of it. He had not thought until now about what it would mean to manage the consequences of his choices without her beside him. Not her help necessarily, not the operational help, the connections and the social intelligence she had provided, but her presence, her steadiness, the thing he had not recognized as stabilizing until the stability began to withdraw. I was in a meeting with his development team at 11 when his phone vibrated with a text from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it during the meeting. When he came out, he read it. It was from David Chen, his lawyer, but from his personal cell. That alone told Nathan something. David used his personal cell when he wanted to say something that didn't belong in any written record. The text said, "Call me when you can. Not urgent, but important. Don't email." Nathan stepped into the stairwell off the main hallway, the one place in the office building where he was reliably alone, and called David back. "Emily met with Carol Metcalf this morning," David said. No preamble. David at his best was a man who got directly to the point when the point was serious. 2 hours. Carol's office called ours this afternoon as a professional courtesy. Emily's filing for divorce, Nathan. The paperwork will be initiated by end of this week. Nathan leaned against the stairwell wall. He had known it was coming. Emily had told him in the quietest, most honest way possible that she was leaving. She had told him on Saturday morning with her portfolio and her blazer and her exit. She had told him Sunday evening in the lamplight when she said she had already been leaving for a long time and now she had somewhere to go. He had known. But knowing and having it formalized were different things. Knowing was abstract. End of this week was a date. "What do I need to do?" he said. "Come see me tomorrow morning," David said. "Before anything else, we need to talk about the business, Nathan. Specifically about what was built during the marriage versus before and what documentation exists for what. Emily's team is going to be thorough. Carol Metcalf is always thorough." "Emily's team," Nathan repeated. "She has a financial advisor already engaged, someone from Blackwood's firm from what I can gather, someone who knows how to read a business structure and identify marital assets." A pause. "Nathan, I need to ask you directly. Is there anything I'm going to find when I pull the full financials that you haven't told me about, anything related to the secondary expense account? The hotel stays, the Kessler, 11 times, expenses routed through the business." Nathan closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I'll explain tomorrow." David made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite silence. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow at 8. Don't be late." He went back into his office and closed the door and sat at his desk and did not move for 7 minutes. She had a financial advisor from Blackwood's firm. She had been building this, not reactively, not in the last few days since the restaurant. She had been building this infrastructure, the company, the legal representation, the financial expertise for months. 8 months, she had said. She had spent 8 months quietly, methodically with the discipline of someone who has learned to plan in secret, because planning openly had been taken from them, constructing the architecture of a life that did not include him. And she had done it while living in the same apartment, while eating breakfast in the same kitchen, while wishing him good night through a door that was more and more frequently a wall. He picked up his phone, he opened his contacts, he scrolled to E past the dozen professional contacts whose names began with E to the name he was looking for, Emily. He had not called her today. He had not called her Saturday or Sunday. He had been respecting her stated need for space, but he recognized now that what he was really doing was avoiding the conversation, because the conversation was the place where the reality became completely undeniable. He called her. She answered on the third ring. "Nathan." "I know about Carol Metcalf," he said. A brief pause. "David called you." "Yes." "I expected he would." No apology in her voice, no defensiveness, just the simple acknowledgement of a sequence she had anticipated. "Then you know what's happening." "I know what's happening," he said. "I need to ask you something." "Okay. Is there anything, any version of this that you haven't already decided, or is the decision made?" The pause this time was longer, not because Emily was uncertain. Nathan could feel even through the phone that she had not arrived at uncertainty. The pause was because she was deciding how honest to be, and then deciding that the answer was completely honest, because they were past the point where softening served anything. "The decision is made," she said. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I know that's hard to hear, but you asked me to be honest." "I asked you to be honest," he confirmed. His voice was steady. He was surprised that it was steady. "Emily, before we stop talking about this, I need you to hear something." "I'm listening." "I was wrong," he said. "Not about any one thing, about the whole thing, the way I treated your work, the way I treated your ideas, the way I let you become smaller without fighting it, the way I replaced everything real in my life with things that looked like winning." He stopped. He made himself continue. "I don't say that to try to change what you've decided. I say it because you deserve to hear it without it being an argument. It's just true, and you deserve to hear me say it." Silence on the line. Then Emily said very quietly, "Thank you." Just that. Thank you. Not forgiveness, not a reopening, not a softening of the decision, just a genuine, unadorned acknowledgement that he had said something real. "The company," Nathan said. "Your company, Whitmore and Blackwood Advisory." "Yes." "It's going to be good," he said. "I looked at the site. It's going to be very good." He heard something on the line that might have been a breath, or might have been the beginning of something that Emily caught and held and chose not to release. "Yes," she said after a moment. "It is." They ended the call with a quietness that was almost, under different circumstances, almost gentle. Nathan put his phone down and looked at the framed magazine feature on his desk, the one with his photo, the one he kept in the drawer, and sometimes set on the surface when he needed the reminder of who he was supposed to be, and he opened the drawer and put it inside and closed the drawer over it. The meeting with his senior agents, Marcus Webb and Diane Kowalski, arrived at 2 the following afternoon with the punctual certainty of a thing that has been scheduled because it cannot be avoided. They were 2 of the best people Nathan had hired. Marcus had been with Whitmore Group for 6 years and was responsible for 3 of the firm's largest commercial deals. Diane had joined 4 years ago from a competing firm and had brought 2 significant client relationships with her. They were in the language of business valuable, and valuable people who requested meetings with their employer were, in Nathan's experience, either preparing to ask for something or preparing to leave. They were not asking for anything. They sat across the conference table from Nathan with the composed discomfort of people who have agreed between themselves how this conversation is going to go and are committed to going through with it. Marcus spoke first. "Nathan, we want to be direct with you because we think you deserve that." "Go ahead," Nathan said. "There's been talk," Marcus said, inside the office and outside, about your personal situation. We know that's not our business, and we want to be clear that we're not here to judge you personally. But the Meridian situation is circling back to us in client conversations. 2 clients called Diane last week with questions. Questions about stability. Questions about leadership. He paused. We're worried, Nathan. About the company. About what the next 6 months looks like if this isn't addressed. Diane leaned forward. We believe in what you've built here, she said. Both of us. That's why we're having this conversation instead of just quietly updating our resumes. But we need to know that you're going to show up for this company the way you did when you were building it. Because right now, no offense intended, you don't look like a man who's showing up. Nathan looked at them both. These 2 people who had invested years in his company, who had carried client relationships and closed deals, and built their own professional identities, partly around the credibility of the firm he had founded, they were sitting across from him and telling him that his personal behavior was threatening the thing they had helped him create. He thought about Emily saying that she had built herself small. I thought about his own construction, the image, the confidence, the performance of unassailable success. He thought about what Diane had just said. You don't look like a man who's showing up. He had spent years showing up in the performance sense, showing up to be seen to be impressive, to be the founder in the expensive suit with the commanding presence. But showing up in the real sense, present, honest, invested in something beyond his own image, he had stopped doing that a long time ago. You're right, he said. Marcus and Diane exchanged a quick glance. They had not expected that to be the first thing out of his mouth. You're both right, Nathan continued. And I'm grateful you're here instead of just leaving. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at them. I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything is fine because it isn't. My marriage is ending and that's going to have consequences I'm still calculating. What I can tell you is that this company is not collateral damage in my personal life. It belongs to everyone who built it, including both of you, and I'm going to treat it that way. Diane studied him. What does that look like specifically? It looks like me calling James Park at Meridian today and scheduling a sit-down with their full board. It looks like transparency about the situation rather than hoping it goes away quietly. It looks like me being in this office every day and being actually present, not just physically present. He paused. And it looks like me listening to you 2 when you tell me something is wrong, which I should have been doing all along. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, and by the end of it, something had shifted in the room, not a resolution, not a return to the easy confidence of before, but something more honest than that. The honesty of people who have acknowledged that a problem exists and have decided to address it together rather than pretend it away. When Marcus and Diane left, Nathan sat alone in the conference room and thought about what he had said. He had said the truth. He had said the truth to his employees in a direct, undefended way that he could not remember doing before, and the experience of it was not what he had feared. He had expected humiliation, and what he found was something more like relief. The particular relief of putting down a weight that has been carried so long that you stopped noticing how heavy it was. He called James Park at Meridian Capital at 4:15. James, he said when Park answered, I think we should have that meeting sooner rather than later, and I think I should come to you directly and honestly about what's happening rather than managing the narrative. If you have 2 hours this week, I'd like to sit down and actually talk. A pause on Park's end, the pause of a man recalibrating. I can do Thursday morning, Park said. 9 o'clock. I'll be there, Nathan said. He hung up and sat for a moment, and then he did something he had not done in longer than he could precisely calculate. He called his mother. She answered the way she always answered, and she always answered immediately, as if she had been waiting, which Nathan suspected was true, in a way that had less to do with the phone and more to do with the particular attentiveness of mothers to children who have stopped calling as often as they should. Nathan, she said. Hey, Mom? His voice came out differently than he intended, younger somehow, closer to something real. Honey. She heard it immediately. The thing in his voice, the fracture underneath the controlled surface. Mothers always heard it. What happened, he told her. Not all of it. Not the version he had told his lawyer, or the careful, strategic version he had presented to his agents. He told her the real version, the version where he was not the victim of circumstances, but the architect of them, where the choices had been his, and the costs were landing where they had always been going to land. His mother listened without interrupting, which was one of her greatest and most undervalued qualities. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to be genuine rather than performative. "You loved her," his mother said finally. Not a question. "I did," Nathan said. "I do. I stopped showing it. I stopped even looking at her long enough to know whether I was showing it or not." "Nathan." His mother's voice was not unkind, but it was honest in the way that people who have loved you longest are honest with you when it matters. "You have been running from something for a very long time. You started running when the company was struggling, when you were afraid it was all going to fall apart, and the running became a habit, and the habit became a life. And somewhere in there, Emily was the thing you were leaving behind." "I know," he said. "Knowing isn't the same as understanding," she said. "And understanding isn't the same as changing. You're still at the beginning of this, sweetheart. It's going to take longer than a week." He sat with that. "I know," he said again, but differently this time, with the weight of what was actually true behind it, rather than the reflexive acknowledgement of someone deflecting discomfort. He drove home at 7 that evening. Emily was not there. There was a note on the kitchen table in her handwriting that said she was having dinner with colleagues and would be back late. The handwriting was even unhurried. No tension in it, no cruelty, just information cleanly given. Nathan made himself dinner for the first time in years. It was not good. He had lost the habit of cooking if he had ever truly had it, and what he produced from the refrigerator was adequate rather than anything more. But the act of doing it, of being present in his own kitchen, of doing something ordinary and domestic, without performing it for anyone, without a restaurant and expensive wine, and the theater of his own success surrounding him felt in a way he could not entirely explain, like the first honest thing he had done with his hands in a very long time. He ate alone at the kitchen table. He did not look at his phone. He did not think about the company or the Meridian meeting or what David Chen would say tomorrow morning. He thought about Emily. I thought about the Emily he had met 16 years ago at a gallery opening that a mutual friend had dragged him to. He had not wanted to go, had been tired from a long week, had almost bailed at the last minute, and who had stood next to a painting and said something so precise and unexpected about it that Nathan had turned to look at her as if she had touched him. He had spent 14 years living next to that woman and forgetting to look at her. The cost of that forgetting was landing now fully and finally without the softening of self-deception or the cushion of blame. He cleaned his plate. He washed it and put it away. He sat back at the kitchen table with a glass of water and listened to the apartment breathe around him, and for the first time in this crisis that had unfolded from a single moment in a restaurant, Nathan Whitmore was not planning, not strategizing, not managing the story he told about himself. I was simply sitting with who he was, and beginning slowly, terrifyingly, to understand that the rebuilding that mattered most had nothing to do with Meridian Capital or client relationships or the professional reputation that had taken a week to fracture. The rebuilding that mattered was internal, and it was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. He was still sitting at the table when he heard the elevator. Emily came through the door at 10:30. She saw him at the table and she stopped for just a moment, something in her expression that he read in the new careful way he was trying to read things honestly as surprise. He was not usually home this early. He was not usually sitting quietly in the kitchen in the dark. "You're here," she said. "I'm here," he said. She looked at him for a moment, a real look, not the careful, managed look of someone protecting themselves, but an honest moment of actually seeing him. Something moved across her face that he couldn't fully name. Then she set down her bag and went to the cabinet and got herself a glass of water and sat down at the table too, not across from him, but at a right angle, the way people sit when they are not confronting each other, but are not quite side by side either. The honest middle distance. They didn't say anything for a while, and somehow that silence was the most real thing that had happened between them in years. The silence between them at that kitchen table lasted 11 minutes. Nathan knew because he watched the clock on the microwave without meaning to, counting the minutes the way a person counts their breathing when they are trying to stay calm in a situation that has no calm available. 11 minutes of two people sitting in the same room without performing anything for each other, without managing tone or choosing words or constructing the version of themselves they needed the other person to see. It was the most honest 11 minutes they had shared in years. Emily spoke first. "You washed your dish," she said. Nathan looked at the drying rack. "I cooked dinner," he said. "It wasn't good." Something moved at the corner of Emily's mouth. Not quite a smile, but not nothing. "You used to cook," she said. "When we first moved to the apartment on Fullerton, you made pasta every Sunday. It was the only thing I knew how to make. You made it well." She turned her glass of water slowly in her hands. "I used to look forward to Sundays." He let that sit. He did not try to turn it into an opening, did not try to use it as a foothold towards something she had already told him she was not offering. He just let it be what it was, a true thing stated plainly from a woman who had decided that plain truth was the only language left worth speaking. "I forgot about Sundays," he said. "I know," Emily said. "You forgot about a lot of things. Not accusation, just fact." "Yeah," he said. "I did." They sat for another few minutes in a silence that was different from the first one, less charged, more tired. The silence of two people on opposite sides of a decision that has already been made, who are learning how to be human with each other again now that the performance is over. Emily stood up. She rinsed her glass and set it in the rack next to his plate. "Get some sleep, Nathan," she said. "You have a hard week ahead." She walked down the hallway. She was right. He had a very hard week ahead, and when it arrived without mercy. Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock. David Chen's office on the 34th floor of a building on Walker Drive, where the windows looked out over the river, and the city spread itself in every direction like a map of everything Nathan had spent his adult life trying to conquer. David was already at his desk when Nathan came in, which meant David had been there for a while, which meant the situation was what Nathan had suspected. It was serious enough to warrant early preparation. "Sit down," David said. Nathan sat. David slid a folder across the desk. Inside it was a preliminary financial summary, the kind of document that legal teams produce in the early stages of divorce proceedings when they are beginning to establish the shape of what exists. Nathan recognized his own company's numbers in it. He recognized the real estate holdings. He recognized the penthouse valuation. He also recognized the secondary expense account. It was itemized. 11 hotel stays at the Kessler, 4 restaurant charges that corresponded to restaurants Nathan had taken Vanessa to, 3 charges that Nathan had categorized as client entertainment that were not by any reasonable definition client entertainment. Emily's team requested full business financial disclosure as part of the preliminary filing process, David said. "This is standard. But Nathan," he pointed to the itemized list, "this is not going to look good. Using business funds for personal expenses constitutes a problem not just in the divorce proceeding, but potentially in your business partnership agreements. Meridian Capital's contract with your firm has a conduct clause." Nathan stared at the itemized list. "A conduct clause," he said. "Standard language in institutional partnership agreements," David said. "It's there to protect the investor in cases where the principal's behavior creates reputational or financial risk. If Meridian decides to invoke it—" David paused and picked his words carefully. "They can exit the partnership without the standard penalty terms." The room was very quiet. 40% of his revenue, gone potentially not through market forces or business failure, but because he had charged hotel stays for his affair to a business account, and someone at Meridian Capital had read the fine print. "How bad is it?" Nathan asked. He meant all of it. The divorce, the Meridian situation, the secondary account, the conduct clause. All of it together as a single question about how much damage had been done. David looked at him with the straightforward honesty of a man who has known Nathan long enough to know that softening the truth would be the wrong kind of kindness. "It's manageable," he said, "but only if you stop making it worse. No more mistakes, Nathan. Everything you do from this point forward professionally, personally is being watched. By Emily's legal team, by Meridian's board, by your own employees." He leaned forward. "You need to be the most boring, most transparent, most above-reproach version of yourself for the foreseeable future. Can you do that?" Nathan thought about the magazine feature in the desk drawer, the image he had been maintaining, the performance of the powerful, untouchable founder. "Yes," he said. "Good." David pulled the folder back. "I'm going to need full access to your business accounts, all of them. Before Emily's team requests it formally, I want us to have already addressed anything that needs addressing. We're not hiding anything, we're organizing. There's a difference." "I understand." "And Nathan." David's voice shifted slightly, less lawyer, more the man who had known Nathan since they were both young and hungry and building things from scratch. "I'm sorry about Emily. Whatever else is happening, I'm sorry. Nathan nodded. I know. He left David's office at 9:45 and stood outside on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold air and thought about conduct clauses and itemized hotel stays and the cumulative weight of choices made in the belief that they were invisible. Nothing was invisible. That was the lesson arriving now from every direction simultaneously. The affair, the dismissal of his wife, the expenses, the arrogance in a restaurant full of people who knew him. None of it had been invisible. He had simply been the last to see it clearly. I went to the Thursday meeting with Meridian Capital, the way a person walks into a room they know will be difficult with their shoulders set and their breathing controlled, and the full acceptance that there was no version of this that was comfortable, only versions that were honest or not. James Park met him in a conference room on the 22nd floor. There were two other people at the table that Nathan had not expected: a woman named Constance, who was Meridian's head of risk assessment, and a man named Robert Falk, who was a senior member of their investment committee. The presence of those two people told Nathan everything he needed to know about where this conversation was going to go before a single word was said. He sat down. James said, "Nathan, I want to thank you for coming in directly. I think that matters." "I asked for this meeting because I thought you deserved honesty rather than management," Nathan said. He had decided on the drive over that this was going to be the operating principle, not strategy, not performance, not the version of himself he usually brought to rooms like this. Just honesty. It was the only thing left with any integrity. So let me be direct. Constance and Robert were both watching him with the careful, neutral attention of professionals who have seen many versions of this kind of meeting and have learned to wait for the moment where the person across the table reveals what they actually are. "My marriage is ending," Nathan said. "The reason it's ending is that I made choices over the past year that were dishonest and that I conducted in ways that I am not proud of. Some of those choices touched my business accounts in ways that my legal team is currently addressing. I am not here to minimize that or to ask you to overlook it." He paused. "I am here to tell you directly that Whitmore Real Estate Group is not a casualty of my personal failures. The company's fundamentals are strong, my team is strong, and I am committed to making the next 12 months the period in which I demonstrate that the business I built is bigger than the mistakes I made." The room was quiet for a moment. Robert Falk spoke. "Nathan, I'll be honest with you. There's a faction on our board that wants to invoke the conduct clause and exit the partnership. They have a legitimate argument." He folded his hands on the table. "There's another faction that thinks long-term, that looks at what Whitmore Group has delivered over 3 years and asks whether one personal crisis is sufficient reason to abandon a productive relationship." He studied Nathan. "You came in here and said things that I did not expect to hear from you. That matters to me, but I need to ask you one direct question." "Ask it," Nathan said. "Is there anything else?" Robert said. "Anything we don't know yet that's going to surface and make this situation worse than it already is, because I can work with known problems. Unknown problems that appear later, those I cannot protect you from." Nathan thought about the question carefully. He thought about the full picture: David's folder, the expense account, the divorce filing, Vanessa, the restaurant, Meridian's conduct clause. He turned the full picture over in his mind and looked at every corner of it. "No," he said. "What you know is what there is. I can put that in writing if it helps." Falk looked at James Park. James looked at Constance. Some wordless institutional communication passed between the three of them that Nathan could read the shape of, but not the content. "We'll be in touch by end of week," James said. "We're not making a decision today, but I want you to know that this conversation, the fact that you came in and said what you said the way you said it, has weight with me personally." Nathan drove back to his office with the particular exhausted clarity of someone who has just done the right thing in a situation where there was no reward for it except the doing. The Meridian decision could still go either way. The conduct clause could still be invoked. The 40% could still walk. But he had been honest. He had been honest in a room full of people who had every reason to expect performance, and the honesty had felt like the only solid ground in a week of shifting surfaces. He was at his desk at 2 p.m, working through a property file that had been neglected for 10 days, when Marcus Webb knocked and came in without waiting to be called, which was unusual enough to make Nathan look up immediately. Marcus's expression was the expression of someone carrying news that they did not choose to carry. "What is it?" Nathan said. Marcus closed the door. He sat down across from the desk with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this moment. I got a call this morning, he said, from Prism Development Group. They're one of our accounts, the Northside Mixed-Use Project. I know who they are. They're pulling out of the project, Marcus said. Not the project itself. They're pulling out of us. They want to move the account to Hargrove and Associates. He paused. They cited concerns about stability. Hargrove and Associates was a competing firm, a smaller firm, a firm that had been trying to poach Whitmore Group clients for 2 years without success. Until now. Nathan sat with this. How much of the Northside project's value are we talking about? He asked. The commission on our end is approximately $380,000, Marcus said. But Nathan, it's not just the commission. If Prism goes to Hargrove, other clients watch that. It's a signal. I knew. Of course he knew. In business, as in everything else, the first departure made the second easier, made the third almost inevitable. One client citing stability concerns was a warning shot. 2 was a pattern. Patterns became narratives, and narratives in the business world moved faster than facts. Get Prism's CEO on the phone, Nathan said. Today, I want to talk to him directly. He's the one who called me, Marcus said. He specifically said he didn't want to speak directly to you. That landed. The client who didn't want to speak directly to him. The client who had looked at Nathan Whitmore, founder and principal of the firm, and decided that the problem was Nathan himself. Okay, Nathan said. He kept his voice level through an effort that was costing him. What else? Marcus hesitated. Marcus. Nathan looked at him directly. What else? Diane got a call from the Lakeview Residential Group, Marcus said. They're not pulling out, but they put a hold on the next phase of the project pending what they called a review of the partnership terms. He looked at Nathan with the honest discomfort of a man who respects his employer enough to deliver bad news cleanly. Nathan, this is moving faster than we thought. It was moving faster than they thought, because damage Nathan was learning did not operate on the timeline of the person it was damaging. It operated on its own timeline following the logic of information and perception, and it did not pause to allow for recovery or regrouping or the management of consequences. He spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone, not performing, not managing, simply talking honestly to every person in his professional circle who had called or emailed in the past week with the careful language of concern. He called the Lakeview Group and spoke for 40 minutes to their project director. He reached out to 3 other clients preemptively before they had the chance to call him with concerns, because he had learned in the past 48 hours that arriving first with honesty was more powerful than arriving second with explanations. He did not reach Prism Development's CEO, but he left a message that was honest and direct and did not ask for anything except the chance to be heard. By 6 o'clock, his voice was tired and his mind was tired, and the particular exhaustion of doing difficult things with integrity, which is a very different exhaustion from the tiredness of performance, had settled into him all the way down to his bones. His phone rang at 6:15. The name on the screen was not a business contact. It was not David Chen or Marcus or James Park or any of the names that had been orbiting him all week, like satellites around a damaged star. It was Vanessa. He stared at her name for 2 full rings. Then he answered. Vanessa, he said. Her voice was different from the last time. The last time there had been the careful brightness and then the real hurt underneath it. Now there was something else, a flatness that was not anger exactly, but was close to it. The sound of a person who has had several days to sit with something and has arrived at a clarity that is not comfortable, but is final. I'm not calling to make things harder, she said. I want you to know that. Okay, he said. I've been thinking about what you said, about me being the part of your life you kept separate. A pause. I want you to know that I knew. Not at first, but by about month 3 I knew that you were never actually going to leave her. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself what we had was enough on its own terms. Another pause longer. I was wrong. And I let myself be wrong because it was easier than admitting that I was in a relationship with someone who was never fully present. Nathan was quiet. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Vanessa continued. I'm saying it because I think you need to hear it from someone who was inside the situation. You have a habit, Nathan, of being physically in the room and emotionally somewhere else entirely. With her, with me. I don't think you were fully present with anyone. Her voice was steady, not cruel, just true. I hope you figure that out. I genuinely mean that. She ended the call. Nathan sat at his desk in the empty office. His staff had gone home. The floor was quiet, and he held the phone in his hand and thought about what Vanessa had just said. You have a habit of being physically in the room and emotionally somewhere else entirely. He thought about Emily saying she had made herself small. He thought about Marcus saying, "You don't look like a man who's showing up." He thought about his mother saying, "You have been running from something for a very long time." 3 different people, 3 different relationships, 3 different perspectives on the same central fact about Nathan Whitmore, that he had learned somewhere along the way to be present without actually arriving to occupy space, without inhabiting it, to maintain proximity to the people in his life, while keeping himself at a safe and unreachable distance from any real accountability to them. He had built a successful company. He had built it the same way, showing up, occupying space, presenting the performance of vision and leadership, while keeping the real inner life, the fears and the doubts and the moments of genuine uncertainty, locked somewhere that no client or employee or partner or wife could access. He had called it strength. What it actually was, he understood now in the quiet of his empty office at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, was fear. He had been afraid. Afraid of being seen as less than the image, afraid that if anyone looked closely enough at the man inside the suit, inside the penthouse, inside the narrative of success, they would find something insufficient. And the irony, the devastating, almost perfect irony, was that the very things he had done to prevent being seen as insufficient had created the insufficiency. The distance, the dismissal, the affair, the performance, all of it had been the fear expressing itself. And all of it had produced exactly the outcome he had been trying to avoid. He had been seen clearly, by Emily, by his agents, by his clients, by Meridian Capital, by Vanessa, who had been inside the performance closest of all. And what they had seen was a man who was not as strong as he believed. He drove home at 7:30. Emily was there, which surprised him. She was at the kitchen table again. She seemed to have reclaimed the kitchen table as her territory, which Nathan had noticed, and had stopped trying to contest with her laptop open and her phone beside her. She was working. She looked up when he came in, assessed him with one quick, honest look, the way she had always been able to do, and said, "Sit down." He sat down. "You look terrible," she said with a directness that was not unkind. "It's been a day," he said. "I heard about Prism Development," she said. He looked at her. "How? The business world in this city is not large," Emily said simply. "People talk. I heard this afternoon." She paused. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I know that's complicated coming from me, but I am." He looked at his wife, his almost former wife, the woman who was in the process of leaving him with the organization and precision of someone who had planned the exit for 8 months, and he felt the particular grief of understanding clearly what someone is to you at the exact moment when you have fully lost the right to say it. "Emily," he said, "can I ask you something? And I need you to answer honestly, not protectively." She closed her laptop. She gave him her full attention the way she always had when something genuinely mattered. "Ask it." "When did you stop believing in me?" he said. "Not as a husband, as a person. When did you look at me and stop believing I was who I said I was?" The question cost him something. He could feel it leaving him, the vulnerability of it, real and unguarded, in a way that he had not allowed himself to be for years. Emily was quiet for a long moment. "It wasn't one moment," she said finally. "It was a collection of them, small ones. The first time you dismissed an idea of mine in front of someone else and then didn't acknowledge it afterward. The time you missed my mother's birthday dinner because of a deal and told me the deal was more important. The time I told you I was lonely and you said you didn't understand what I had to be lonely about." She paused. "It's not that I stopped believing in you all at once. It's that every time one of those moments happened and you didn't come back afterward, didn't acknowledge it, didn't try to repair it, a little more of the belief went away." She looked at him steadily. "Until one day, I realized I was waiting for something I had stopped expecting would come." He listened to all of it without defending any of it. "The birthday dinner," he said. "Your mother's birthday." "November 2021, Emily said. He remembered it. He had not thought about it in years, but he remembered it now. The deal had been a commercial lease negotiation that could have waited, that he had told himself could not wait, that had not in fact been as time-critical as he had presented it to himself and to Emily. "I'm sorry," he said. "For that specifically, I'm sorry." "I know," Emily said, and she meant it. He could hear that she meant it. But she also clearly was done with sorry as currency. Sorry was not the unit of exchange anymore. "What are you going to do, Nathan, going forward? Not about the divorce, not about Meridian, about yourself. What are you actually going to do?" He thought about it honestly, which meant he sat with it for a moment, rather than reaching for the first answer that sounded good. "I'm going to stop running," he said. "I've been running from something since the company was almost bankrupt and I've never stopped. I think I need to stop." He looked at his hands. "I think I need to go talk to someone, a therapist. Someone outside of all of this who can help me figure out why I built everything the way I built it." He paused. "And I think I need to actually run my company instead of performing running my company. There's a difference that I've been ignoring." Emily studied him. "That's the most self-aware thing you've said to me in 4 years," she said. "Not warm exactly, but honest. I believe you mean it." "I do mean it. I hope it works," she said. And then carefully, "But Nathan, it doesn't change what I've decided. I need you to understand that. The things you just said, they're good things. They're true things. But they're not things that change where I am. I've been waiting 14 years for this version of you. I can't keep waiting." "I know," he said. And this time, the knowledge was different from all the previous times he had said those words this week. This time, it was not deflection or management or the performance of understanding. This time, it was simply true. He knew. She was leaving because she had earned the right to leave, because she had given more than anyone should have to give, and had received less than anyone should have to accept. Because she had a company now and a partner who believed in her, and a future that did not require Nathan Whitmore's permission or participation. She was leaving because she had finally, after years of waiting, chosen herself. And Nathan, sitting at his kitchen table at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night with his professional world cracking, and his marriage ending, and the full accumulated weight of his choices pressing down on him from every direction. Nathan finally understood that the most loving thing he could do was let her go. Not dramatically, not with a gesture or a speech or another apology, simply let her go. He stood up from the table. "I'm going to make some calls tomorrow," he said. "To the therapist my doctor recommended 6 months ago, and I never called. And I'm going to talk to my staff in the morning, the whole team, not just Marcus and Diane, and I'm going to tell them the truth about what's happening and what I'm going to do about it." Emily watched him. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Okay," he said. He went to the spare bedroom. He had stopped pretending to sleep anywhere else. He lay in the dark and thought about the Prism call and the Meridian meeting and David's folder and Vanessa's phone call and his mother's voice and the 11 minutes of silence in Emily's face when she said the birthday dinner, November 2021. And then he stopped thinking about all of it because there was nothing useful left to think about tonight. The thinking had been done. The understanding was in place. What came next was not thinking. What came next was doing. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since the night at Aurelius, when his life had cracked open across a restaurant dining room, Nathan Whitmore slept. Not peacefully, not without weight, but genuinely, deeply. The sleep of a man who has stopped lying to himself and has arrived at last at the cold, clear ground of what is actually true. In the morning, the work would begin. Not the work of image or performance or the maintenance of a story that had never been fully honest. The real work. The kind that doesn't show in magazines or business metrics or the admiring attention of restaurant rooms. The kind that happens in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the daily choice to be present in your own life rather than performing it from a careful and comfortable distance. That work. I was ready, finally, to begin it. He called the therapist at 7:53 in the morning before he had coffee, before he checked his phone, before he allowed himself any of the usual morning rituals that could become excuses for delay. The receptionist answered on the second ring. "I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Reeves," Nathan said. "As soon as possible. I've been referred by Dr. Marcus Hale. My name is Nathan Whitmore." "Dr. Reeves has an opening Thursday at 10, the receptionist said. "I'll take it," he said before she finished the sentence. He hung up and stood in the kitchen in the early morning quiet and felt the particular strange lightness of having done a thing he had been avoiding for 6 months in under 90 seconds. The therapist referral had sat in his email since April. Dr. Sandra Reeves, clinical psychologist, specializing in high-functioning adults experiencing life transitions, Dr. Hale had written, which was the careful professional language for men like Nathan, who had built enormous external structures to avoid examining what was happening inside them. He had told himself he didn't have time. He had told himself he didn't need it. He had told himself a great many things that he was no longer willing to tell himself. Emily came into the kitchen at 8:15. She was already dressed. She stopped when she saw him at the table reading through documents, coffee in hand, present in a way that she had learned over months not to expect. "You're up early again," she said. "I called the therapist," he said. "Thursday at 10. She paused at the coffee maker. Her back was to him, but he saw the slight shift in her shoulders, something adjusting, something acknowledging. "Good," she said. "Just that." But the word was genuine. She poured her coffee and turned around and leaned against the counter, and for a moment they were simply two people in a kitchen in the early morning, and the full catastrophe of everything between them receded just far enough that they could breathe. "The company meeting is at 9, Nathan said. "Full staff. I'm going to tell them what's happening." Emily studied him over her coffee cup. "All of it. Enough of it," he said. "Enough to be honest without making it about drama. They deserve to know their employer is going through something significant and that the company is not going to suffer for it." He paused. "They've earned that from me." "They have," Emily said quietly. The meeting happened at 9:15 in the main conference room, with all 23 members of his staff arranged around the table and along the walls. Nathan stood at the head of the room and looked at the people who had built their professional lives around the company he had created, and he told them the truth. Not the performance version, not the managed, strategically shaped version. The truth. I told them his marriage was ending, and that it was ending because of choices he had made. He told them that some of those choices had touched the business accounts, and that his legal team was addressing that with full transparency. He told them that Meridian Capital's partnership was under review, and that he had met with them directly and honestly, and was waiting on their decision. He told them about Prism Development, and about the Lakeview hold, and about the calls he had made and the conversations he was having. He told them the company was not failing. He told them the fundamentals were solid. He told them that he was committed to being present, actually present in a way that his behavior over the past year had not demonstrated. And then he said the thing that made the room go completely still. "I owe some of you an apology," he said, "for being the kind of leader who was more interested in looking successful than actually leading. Marcus, Diane, you came to me and told me something was wrong, and you were right, and you deserved to not have to do that. You deserved a principal who caught it himself." He looked around the room. "I'm going to do better. Not because my back is against the wall, although it is. Because you built this with me, and you deserved better from the beginning." The room was quiet for 10 seconds. Then Grace, his executive assistant, who had worked with him for 5 years, and who maintained a professional composure that Nathan had always relied on precisely because it never cracked, said quietly from her seat along the wall, "Thank you for telling us yourself. That was all, but it was enough." The meeting broke up with the restrained but genuine energy of people who have been given something they were not expecting and don't quite know what to do with it yet, but recognize it as real. Marcus caught Nathan's eye on the way out and gave him a single nod that communicated more than a conversation would have. Nathan went back to his office and worked. Not performed working, worked. He went through the Lakeview file line by line. He drafted a personal letter to Prism Development's CEO that did not argue or defend, but simply stated his commitment and left the door open. He reviewed 3 property analyses that had been waiting for his input for 2 weeks, and provided that input with the focused attention of someone who had remembered what it felt like to care about the work itself rather than what the work represented. By noon, he had done more actual work than he had done in the previous 2 weeks combined. His phone rang at 12:45. Meridian Capital, James Park. Nathan answered it with the steady hands of a man who has accepted that some outcomes are not within his control, only his response to them. "Nathan," James said, "I'm calling with the board's decision." "Go ahead," Nathan said. "We're not invoking the conduct clause," James said. "The board voted this morning. It wasn't unanimous, and I want to be honest with you about that. There were voices for exiting the partnership. But the majority position was that what you demonstrated in Thursday's meeting, the directness, the transparency, the absence of what I'll call image management, was worth more as a forward-looking indicator than the mistakes were as a backward-looking one." A pause. "We're staying in Nathan, with conditions." "Name them," Nathan said. "Quarterly transparency reports directly to our investment committee, not just standard financial disclosures. a third-party audit of the secondary expense account, and a 6-month review at which point we reassess. James's voice was measured, professional, but there was something underneath it that might have been cautiously respect. You took a risk coming in the way you did. I want you to know that it mattered. Thank you, James, Nathan said. I won't waste it. He set the phone down. He sat for a moment in the quiet of his office, and what he felt was not triumph. This was not a moment for triumph, was nowhere near a moment for triumph, but something more like the feeling of ground under your feet after you have been in water. Solid, plain, unglamorous, real. Meridian was staying. One thing at least had held. He told Marcus, who received the news with visible relief, and then said with the frankness that had made him valuable from the beginning, "Don't make us go through that again." "I won't," Nathan said. He meant it. 3 weeks passed. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the organized, emotionally detached machinery that legal processes apply to the endings of human relationships. Carol Metcalf's team was thorough, as David had predicted. The asset documentation was detailed. The business valuation required a third-party assessment that took 9 days and produced a number that Nathan's team and Emily's team then negotiated around with the careful, structured distance of people conducting business rather than ending a marriage. Emily moved out of his penthouse on a Saturday in mid-November. She had arranged the moving company herself. She had arranged to be there while Nathan was not, which he had agreed to, without needing to be asked, because he understood that watching her leave would serve nothing except his own need to mark the moment with his presence, and he had been making things about his own needs for long enough. He came back to the apartment at 4 in the afternoon. The reading corner was the first thing he noticed. The lamp was gone. Of course it was gone. It was hers. She had found it. She had carried it home. She had positioned it exactly right. Of course she had taken it, but the corner without it looked like exactly what it was, a space that had been made warm by someone's specific attention and care and had returned to its essential blankness in her absence. Nathan stood in front of the empty corner for a long time. He did not cry, not then. He had cried once privately, sitting in his car in the parking garage of his office building at 10 in the evening. 3 days earlier, the particular ugly sobbing of a man who has held something together past its breaking point and finally let it go. He had cried then, and he had sat with it, and then he had gone upstairs and finished his work and gone home and been present. He did not cry now. He simply stood in front of the empty corner and let himself feel the full, honest weight of what was gone, and he did not try to make it mean anything more than what it was. She had taken the lamp. The warmth it had made was hers. He needed to learn finally to make his own. He bought a lamp the following week. Not the same kind. He didn't try to replicate what Emily had created because that would have been a performance of grief rather than the actual work of rebuilding. He found something different, something that fit the corner in a new way, and he positioned it and sat in the light of it and tried to begin the work of learning who he was in the absence of the person he had structured his life around, dismissing. Dr. Sandra Reeves was 61 years old and had an office on the north side that was deliberately, almost defiantly ordinary. No penthouse view, no expensive art on the walls, just a room with 2 chairs and a window that looked out at the street, and a woman who listened with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who had spent 30 years hearing things that people found very difficult to say. In their first session, she asked him, "What do you want from this?" He had prepared an answer. He had thought on the drive over about how to frame his situation, how to present it with appropriate self-awareness while maintaining the core architecture of his narrative. He had been about to deliver the prepared answer, and then he stopped, because the prepared answer was the problem. The prepared answer was the entire problem in miniature sitting right there in her waiting room. "I don't want to run anymore," he said instead. "I've been running from something since I was 28 years old, and I don't know what I'm running from, and I'm tired." Dr. Reeves looked at him steadily. "Then let's find out what it is," she said. He went every Thursday at 10. I went through November and into December, through the finalization of the divorce settlement and the third-party audit and the Meridian quarterly report, and the slow-grinding, unglamorous work of being a person who had decided to tell the truth about himself and was discovering that telling the truth once begun had to be comprehensive or it was nothing at all. He discovered things. He discovered that the running had started not at 28, as he had said, but earlier in a childhood with a father who treated financial success as the only legitimate form of self-expression, for whom money was not a tool, but a language, the only language worth speaking. He discovered that he had learned early that the way to be loved by the most important person in his life was to achieve, to accumulate, to build visible proof of value. He discovered that he had married Emily partly because she was the first person who had looked at him and seen something worth loving that had nothing to do with what he was building. And then once he had that, once he had the love he had not known how to receive, he had defaulted to the only language he knew: achievement, accumulation, visible proof, and had left her to stand in the corner of his success story, wondering where the man had gone who had once held her face in his hands after an investor meeting and told her she was extraordinary. Dr. Reeves did not say this to him. He said it to himself in her office in the 4th session with the stunned quality of a person who has found the thing they were looking for in the last place they thought to look. "I replaced her love with the company," he said. "Once I had the company, I didn't know what to do with being loved, so I made the company the thing instead." "And what did that cost her?" Dr. Reeves asked. "Everything," he said. "It cost her everything, and she paid it. For years she paid it. And when she finally stopped, I still didn't understand what she had been paying." He sat with that for the remainder of the session and for many evenings afterward. In December, something happened that Nathan had not expected. He ran into Emily. Not accidentally. Chicago was not small enough for accidents between two people who had arranged their new lives with care, but at a professional event, an art investment symposium that he had registered for months earlier and had not thought to cancel, and that Emily, as the founder of a growing art advisory company, had of course been invited to attend. He saw her across the room before she saw him. She was with two colleagues he didn't recognize, and she was talking with her hands the way she always did when her mind was fully engaged, and she was wearing something he had never seen, deep blue, effortlessly composed, and she looked like what she was. A woman who had built something real and was standing inside it. She saw him at the same moment he was deciding whether to approach or step back. They looked at each other across the room, and then she made a small composed gesture, a slight tilt of her chin, an acknowledgement that said without words, "I see you. I am not angry. I am here." He walked over. "Emily," he said. "Nathan." She turned slightly to her colleagues. "Give me a moment, please." They stepped away with the professional ease of people who understood the room without being told. The two of them stood facing each other for the first time since she had moved out in a room full of people who didn't know their history and didn't need to. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. And it was true. He could see it was true. It was not performed wellness, not the careful presentation of recovery. It was the actual thing, the specific quality of a person who is living the life they chose, rather than enduring the life they inherited. "The company," he said. "I saw the press piece, Chicago Business Review." A small press feature had run 2 weeks earlier about Whitmore and Blackwood Advisory covering their first quarter of formal operation. It had been favorable in the specific way of business journalism that recognizes something real rather than something manufactured. Emily had been quoted twice, and both quotes had been sharp and specific, and had demonstrated a quality of thinking that the journalist had clearly not expected, and had made the centerpiece of the piece. "It's going well," Emily said. "Better than projected, actually. We brought on a 5th client last week, museum-level collection. It's a significant account." "You built something extraordinary," he said. She looked at him. She was reading him the way she had always been able to read him, with the particular accuracy of someone who has known a person across their full range and understands the difference between what they perform and what they mean. "Thank you," she said. And then, "How are you, Nathan, really?" "I'm in therapy," he said. "Every Thursday. It's not easy, but it's real." He paused. "The company is stabilizing. Meridian stayed. We lost Prism, which I think was fair. I'm rebuilding some things." He held her gaze. "I'm trying to be honest about what actually happened instead of the version that makes me look better." Emily nodded slowly. "That's hard," she said. "Harder than most people manage." "I know," he said. "I'm not telling you because I expect it to change anything. I'm telling you because you asked how I really was, and you deserve a real answer." She looked at him for a long moment. the look of someone who is seeing a person clearly, with the full history between them present and accounted for, and is making a decision about what that person is now rather than what they were. "I'm glad," she said finally. "I genuinely mean that. Whatever happens with the company and the therapy and all of it, I'm glad you're doing it." She paused. "For you, not for me. For you." "For me," he agreed. They stood in the honest space between them for a moment that was not comfortable and was not painful, that was simply true. Two people who had been deeply important to each other, who had failed each other in their different ways, who were standing on the other side of it and choosing to be decent. "I should get back," Emily said. "Of course," he said. "Emily." She paused. He said the thing he had needed to say since the night in the restaurant and had never found the exact moment for. "You were always extraordinary. I knew it when I married you. I just forgot how to show it. I'm sorry I forgot." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. She walked back to her colleagues. Nathan stood for a moment and watched her go. Not with longing, or not only with longing, with something more complete than that. With the recognition of a man who finally understood the value of what he had held and failed to protect, and would spend the rest of his life learning from. He stayed at the symposium for another hour. He talked to people. He was present. He listened more than he spoke, which was new for him, and which felt strangely more powerful than the version of himself that had filled rooms with the force of his own narrative. He drove home alone. The penthouse was quiet in the way it was always quiet now, not the quiet of emptiness exactly, but the quiet of a space that was in the process of being redefined. He had started cooking on Sunday evenings again, not well but consistently. He had rehung some of the art that Emily had left because she had her own new space to fill. He had called his mother twice without needing a crisis to justify it. I was learning slowly and imperfectly, and with the assistance of a therapist who did not let him off easy what it felt like to be present in his own life. Not the life he had performed, his actual life. January came, and with it the formal finalization of the divorce. David Chen called to let him know the papers had been signed and filed. Nathan said thank you, and put down the phone and sat for a moment with the legal end of 14 years. Then he got up and went to his desk and worked. Not because he was avoiding the feeling. He had learned in Dr. Reeves's office over the fall the difference between avoiding a feeling and moving through it. He had felt the full weight of the divorce, had been feeling it since October, had been sitting with it, had been letting it be real. What he was doing now was not avoidance. He was showing up. To his work, to his company, to the daily ongoing choice of being present rather than performing presence. Marcus knocked at 10:30. "The Lakeview group called," he said. He was smiling in the careful way of someone delivering good news in a context that has recently included a lot of bad news and wants to make sure the delivery lands correctly. "They've lifted the hold. They want to move forward with phase 2. Nathan looked at him. "That's good news," he said. "That's very good news," Marcus said. "Diane's already drafting the terms." The Lakeview group coming back was not the headline victory of his old life. It was not a magazine feature or a record-breaking deal or the kind of success that announced itself to a room. It was a client returning because they had watched how he handled adversity and had decided he was worth trusting again. That was better than any headline. That was earned. In February, Nathan attended a small gallery opening on the north side that a colleague had invited him to. He went because he had been making himself go to things, making himself be in rooms, making himself participate in the world rather than managing his appearance in it. The gallery was showing work by 3 emerging artists whose names Nathan didn't know. He walked through it slowly with the attention of someone who is looking rather than being seen looking, and he stopped in front of a painting that made him stand still in the way that things rarely made him stand still. It was large and quiet, and it was a painting of a lamp in a corner. Not literally Emily's lamp, he understood that. It was a stranger's lamp painted by someone he had never met, depicting a corner he had never been in. But it hit him in the chest the way that real things hit you, the way that art does what it is supposed to do when it is working. He stood in front of it for 4 minutes. Then he found the gallery coordinator and bought it. He put it in the reading corner, not as a monument, not as a performance of his own growth, just as a reminder, as a thing that was honest about what a space could hold when the right kind of attention was paid to it. He sat in the reading corner that evening with the light of his new lamp and a book he had been meaning to read for 3 years, and he sat there without his phone and without music and without the noise of his own narrative running in the background of everything. He read, "I was simply there in his own life in his own home present. 8 months after the night at Aurelius that had cracked everything open. Nathan Whitmore was not the man he had been. He was not better in the simple, clean way of stories that end with rehabilitation and redemption and the lesson neatly applied. He was more complicated than that. He was a man who had caused real harm to real people, who had spent years building an image instead of a character, who was only now at 42 in therapy, with a divorce finalized and a Meridian audit completed and a Sunday pasta routine re-established, beginning to understand the difference. I was not the man he had been. He was not yet fully the man he was trying to become, but he was doing the work, the real work, the daily, invisible, unglamorous work of being honest with himself, in the moments when dishonesty would have been easier, of showing up for the people who had stayed, of sitting with the weight of what he had lost, without trying to escape it or reframe it or reconstruct a story in which it was someone else's fault. And Emily Whitmore. She had formally returned to her maiden name, Emily Harlow, in February, which Nathan had learned from David Chen, and which had felt when he heard it like the sound of a door closing. At last, Emily was building something that was fully and entirely hers. Whitmore and Blackwood Advisory had grown in the 8 months since its formal launch to a roster of 9 clients, with combined portfolios worth over $200 million. She had hired 4 full-time staff and 2 consultants. She had been quoted in a national publication. She had given a keynote at a symposium in New York that Adrian Blackwood, her partner and lead investor, had attended, and afterward described to colleagues as one of the most precise and compelling analyses of the luxury art investment market he had heard in 20 years of working in it. She was not Nathan Whitmore's wife. She was Emily Harlow, entrepreneur, art investment expert, a woman who had spent 14 years making herself small for someone who wasn't paying attention, and who had spent 8 months expanding back into the full size of who she had always been. She had not destroyed Nathan. She had simply stopped letting his version of her define her. She had walked away from the role he had written for her, and in the walking away had discovered that the person who existed outside that role was more capable, more confident, more genuinely powerful than the performance of power she had lived beside for over a decade. Nathan, on a Tuesday morning in March, was at his desk by 8. He had a coffee. He had a full schedule. He had 3 property files open, and a call with the Meridian Committee at 11, and a therapy appointment on Thursday. He had finally and genuinely shown up. Not for the version of himself that belonged in magazine features, for the people who had stayed, for the company they had built together, for the daily, ordinary, non-spectacular work of being a person of actual integrity rather than performed integrity. He had learned it the hardest possible way, through the loss of the most important person in his life, through the near collapse of everything he had built, through the exposure of every self-deception he had carefully constructed and lived inside of for years. He had learned it, and the learning, unlike the performance, was real. Some lessons only come when everything else falls away. Some truths only become visible when the image you have been protecting finally, fully, and irrevocably breaks. Nathan Whitmore had needed his world to crack open before he could see what was actually inside it. What was inside it in the end was simpler and harder and more worth having than anything he had spent 14 years performing. The capacity to be present, the willingness to be honest, the courage to be small enough to grow. He picked up his coffee. He opened the first file,